Imagine a city where fear walks before footsteps, where silence itself feels unsafe, and where entire neighborhoods are swallowed by a single name that no one dares to say out loud. A name whispered in fear, painted in graffiti on crumbling walls, etched into the memory of every victim who never saw it coming. This wasn't just a group of criminals, it was a shadow empire, a force so ruthless and untouchable that even law enforcement hesitated before crossing their path. Tonight, we uncover the chilling story behind the rise and fall of America's most dangerous gang. A story that begins in broken streets and ends in blood, betrayal, and the collapse of a monster of their own making. To understand how this gang rose to power, you have to step into the forgotten corners of American cities. Streets where poverty wasn't just common, it was destiny. Out of crumbling neighborhoods and fractured families, a group of young men with nothing to lose began forming alliances. At first, they were just boys fighting to survive. They carried knives, cheap pistols, whatever they could get their hands on. But survival soon turned into ambition. Every robbery, every carjacking, every small-time hustle wasn't just about money. It was a test, a stepping stone. They were building something darker, a hierarchy that transformed street kids into soldiers and soldiers into warlords. The gang didn't just commit crimes, they branded themselves. They marked their streets with signs, symbols, tattoos that weren't just ink, but blood oaths. Their look, their walk, their language, it all screamed loyalty and terror. And as their numbers swelled, so did their hunger. What began as street corners turned into entire neighborhoods under their control. Drugs became their empire. Cocaine, heroin, meth. If it could poison a city, they sold it. And the money that poured in wasn't just cash, it was power, influence, and fear. With every dollar, they bought guns. With every gun, they bought silence. With silence, they bought control. Soon, the gang wasn't just fighting rival groups, they were declaring war on the very cities that tried to contain them. Police patrols couldn't enter certain blocks without backup. Families were forced to pay them for protection or face the consequences. Anyone who resisted, business owners, local leaders, even their own members, was made an example of. Execution-style killings in broad daylight became a message carved into the heart of the city. We own this place. But fear alone wasn't their only weapon. They were smart, more strategic than anyone realized. The gang operated like a corporation. They had ranks, codes, meetings. Leaders gave orders, lieutenants enforced them, soldiers carried them out. If you broke the code, you didn't just risk punishment, you risked annihilation. Some members who tried to leave were hunted down, their bodies dumped in alleys as a warning. There's only one way out: death. What made them truly terrifying wasn't just their brutality, it was their ability to spread like wildfire. From one city, they expanded to another, then another. Their network crossed state lines, creeping into suburban towns, rural communities, even schools. The gang's reputation became so infamous that the very mention of their name sparked panic. They weren't just a gang anymore, they were an urban plague. And yet, with all this chaos, the leaders at the top lived like kings. They drove luxury cars, wore gold chains, and threw parties that looked like scenes from crime films. They weren't hiding in shadows, they flaunted their wealth in broad daylight, daring authorities to challenge them. But beneath the surface, paranoia was eating them alive. They trusted no one, slept with guns under their pillows, and suspected betrayal at every turn. Because in their world, loyalty had an expiration date. It wasn't long before the gang's violence grew so extreme that even the government could no longer ignore them. Task forces were formed, undercover agents infiltrated their meetings, wiretaps recorded their every word. The FBI and local police began to treat them not as thugs, but as terrorists. Every murder, every shipment of drugs, every coded message brought law enforcement closer to cracking their empire. But the gang fought back viciously. They killed informants, burned down safe houses, and unleashed violence on anyone suspected of working with the police. And yet, the cracks were already forming. Power breeds enemies, and within the gang, greed began to tear them apart. Lieutenants plotted against leaders, soldiers questioned their orders, and whispers of betrayal spread like poison. The very structure that had made them unstoppable now became their weakness. Because when loyalty dies, fear alone can't hold an empire together. The fall began slowly, almost invisibly. A single arrest here, a drug bust there. But each loss chipped away at the empire. And when the first major leader was taken down, everything changed. One by one, their top brass were captured, dragged into courtrooms where prosecutors painted them not as men, but as monsters. Former members, once sworn to die for the gang, flipped under pressure and testified against their own brothers. The codes of silence shattered, replaced by desperate pleas for shorter sentences. But even as leaders fell, the gang refused to die quietly. Retaliations were swift and bloody. Witnesses disappeared, judges were threatened, jurors feared for their lives. Trials became circuses of intimidation. The message was clear: you may catch us, but you'll never control us. And for a while, it seemed true. For every leader arrested, another stepped into their place. The cycle of violence never stopped, it just shifted. What ultimately brought them down wasn't just the law, it was themselves. Rivalries exploded into open warfare. Leaders betrayed one another, alliances crumbled, and entire factions split off, turning guns on each other instead of their enemies. The gang that once united thousands under one name now devoured itself from the inside out, and the streets that had once been painted in their colors were painted red with their own blood. By the time the dust settled, the empire was no more. Their leaders were locked in federal prisons, serving life sentences with no chance of escape. The soldiers who survived either fled, disappeared, or tried to live quietly under new identities. Entire neighborhoods, once under their shadow, began to breathe again, though the scars they left will never fade. And yet, their legacy still lingers. To this day, the name of America's most dangerous gang sparks fear. It's a story of how power corrupts, how violence breeds more violence, and how empires built on blood always end the same way, consumed by their own fire. But the darkest truth of all? Even after the fall, pieces of them remain. Small cells, hidden factions, ghosts of the empire that once was. Because evil like this doesn't vanish, it waits. In broken streets, in lost youth, in the same poverty and desperation that gave birth to them in the first place. And somewhere out there, in the silence of another forgotten alley, the seeds of the next rise are already being planted. So when we look back at the rise and fall of America's most dangerous gang, it's not just a history lesson, it's a warning, a reminder that monsters don't come from nowhere. They are made, piece by piece, in the shadows of society. And if we're not careful, history has a way of repeating itself. Because in the end, the scariest part of this story isn't how the gang fell, it's how easily it could happen again.